Parents of Reddit, what is the creepiest thing a friend of your kid has done at your house? 11-year-old kid comes to my house. Friend of my daughter's. She goes into the bathroom, takes a sheet and then calls out for assistance. Apparently her parents still wiped her ass. Sorry kid. This is not a service I offer. Some neighbor's kid started pouring rubbing alcohol into our aquarium. Good thing we caught him early. I saw a grown-ass man pouring vodka into his own aquarium. It was at a house party and I thought there wasn't any fish as he was jokingly asking if they would get drunk too and party with us. Lo and behold. Half an hour later he was devastated. I grew up on a small dead-end street and we were the only ones with a pool, so we spent a lot of our summers in our pool. There was this one neighbor who weirded us all out. He was a hardcore druggie and we found him passed out drunk in his pickup a lot. Well, his niece and nephew came to live with him because their mom died. So they started swimming with us too. The girl was older than most of us and also larger. A few times she decided it would be funny to push a few of us underwater and hold us there, especially me since I was the smallest and youngest. We stopped letting them come over after that. Not a parent, but I recall this very vividly. I was friends with this kid at my school whose parents didn't really care for him. So when he all but invited himself over one weekend, his parents dropped him off with food on the street corner and just kinda left. Mind you, I have no sidewalk on my street. It's just ditches and then a very heavily trafficked road. So he walked along the side of the road to my house and entirely expected to then stay for most of the day. When my parents called his parents to come get him, they made some excuse about how he'd said he'd be staying the night, which I'd never agreed to, and we forced them to come pick him up. When everything was said and done, it wound up being his 16-year-old brother who came to get him, who I later learned couldn't legally drive at the time. Maybe not creepy, but honestly a very weird and disturbing situation to find myself in the middle of. Not a parent. But once at a sleepover when I was about 12, my dad ordered pizza and one of the girls kept stepping on a slice and using it as a foot massager. My dad is still perplexed by this even over a decade later. Wow. That's genuinely bizarre. I would love to know why she was doing that. I can't even think of the slightest explanation. I'm the weird kid in this story. There was this kid I used to hang out with all the time. I used to go over to his house and we played video games for hours straight. This one time, me and another friend went over to his house to ask him if he wanted to come play with us. They weren't at home, but they had their cleaning lady in their house working. Now I can't remember if it is the lady who invited us in, or if we invited ourselves in given our familiarity with the place. But one way or another we went inside and helped ourselves with his video games, completely unaware of the weirdness of the situation that we're in. The lady even brought us snacks. They eventually came back to find two kids in their living room playing video games. His mom got upset with the lady, I think. But I do remember her calmly explaining us that it was not okay and we shouldn't be in their home again unless they are home. I really wasn't the brightest kid. Not a parent. But this happened when I was about 11 or 12. I was sleeping over at a friend's house, let's call him Joe, and there was another friend staying over, Tom. Joe and I were upstairs in his room playing Xbox at like 10 PM. Went down to the kitchen to get a glass of water and see Tom sitting on a couch in the dark staring blankly at nothing. I was like, UHH, what are you up to, man? And he just straight up looks me in the eye and goes, I'm talking to my grandma. This dude's grandmother died when he was like 4 or something. Needless to say, I noped the duck out of there. Never saw that kid again. Went into the kitchen and then ran into the bathroom. He comes out half an hour later and I ask if he's okay. He says sure and gets back to playing video games. I went into the bathroom later that day and found a cucumber caked in sheets sitting in the trash can. It smelled bad and had specks of blood. Obligatory, I'm not a parent, but this is something me and my parents talk about to this day. I had a slumber party in 1st grade and invited probably 8-10 girls. Can't remember how or why, but we all ended up in the bathroom. One of the girls has to use the bathroom. So we all walk out, except one girl. She stood there and sheet on my bathroom wall. right in front of the other chick. Her excuse? The other girl was on the toilet and she couldn't hold it. Girl was a duckin' weirdo to begin with. She ended up being my roommate last year and was just as ducking strange and 10 times more annoying. Edit, spelling. My daughter had a friend come around when she was 7 or 8. This girl was pretty odd and obviously used to getting her own way. But the weirdest thing was one day when I was in the kitchen and they had been playing outside. I am renovating our house and there were no baseboards so you could see under the house. It looks creepy as an adult. But kids have vivid and wild imaginations. They come running in and she grabs a sharp knife from the kitchen drawer. I stop her and ask her what she's doing. My daughter says they are going to kill the monster under the house. I tell her to immediately put that knife back. But we need to kill the monster. And then they both start to run out again. I very firmly tell her to put it back. Now. She does. We told her mother about it but she is not very good at the whole parenting thing. I shudder to think what could have happened. Not a parent, rather. I was the kid in this story. My mum got engaged to this rich guy whose daughter was a couple of years younger than me. Growing up she had practically every animal she'd ever asked her dad to buy for her, but over the years once they eventually died, she buried them in a corner of their backyard. One day she showed me the little rocks she had put on top of their graves as makeshift tombstones. I suggested that we dig up the bodies so we could see what they looked like. She said no and afterwards ended up coincidentally staying at a friend's place every following weekend that I was due to stay at her dad's place. Sorry Ash. No parent. But as a kid I'd have this friend that would kill small animals. Try and shove my little sister down the stairs. And do all sort of twisted stuff. Needless to say he ended up in jail for robbing a place I think. Guy wasn't fully there. Didn't come from a broken home or anything either. His parents were absolutely lovely. Still talk to his parents to this day. Him. Not so much. I'm not a parent but know someone's kid who held the neighbor's guinea pig and was playing with the lifeless body for like an hour. Like the cartoon Lenny. Played to rough and ducked it up. The kid was 4 at the time. Duck. That reminds me of a little cousin of mine who put his kitten in the toilet. Closed the lid and flushed the toilet over and over so it would stop meowing. It eventually drowned and he put in the trash can next to the toilet. And went on to play video games. He was 6. Kid ducking scares me. While the brain develops, foresight, impulse control, and empathy are usually the last parts to develop, both during initial development and changing during puberty. Kids can be absolute psychopaths and it's why. Save for extreme cases. Kids can't be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder until later in life when it's clear that empathy is underdeveloping. If at all. A girl came over to my house and did come super psychopath. I want your life sheet. This girl I knew from 1st grade came over for a sleepover. We must have fought over something. Because I went up to my room because I got so mad at her. I forget why. It must have been big though because I'm not one to march out on a guest. Anyway. While I'm upstairs crying, I see in the mesh pocket of her away bag a bright pink Easter egg with some fur stinking out of it, and I realize I hear faint squeaking. I go over. Pick up the egg. And it's warm and shaking. I open it and my pet mouse like explodes out of there. I'm absolutely horrified. I see in the bag all of my favorite toys and some of my clothes. She took them and squirreled them away in her clothes to try to hide them. I go downstairs with the Easter egg, ready to absolutely raise hell with my evidence. Only to see my mom in the kitchen quite shaken already. There she is. Looking down at my pet guinea pig in its cage. Nose bloody. Right front paw torn off. And obviously dead. This kid was sitting on the couch watching TV acting like she had no idea what happened. In less than 1 hour this kid brutally murdered my pet. Tried to take another one for later. And planned to take my favorite toys and even some of my clothes. My mom was like nope, sent me to a friend's house and drove that kid home because she wasn't waiting for her parents to come get her. When my mom talked to her about it while in the car, she said the girl said I just wanted to be like her. Never saw that kid again. Hope she's safely locked away somewhere. Not a parent but a friend of mine did something pretty weird. We were 11 or 12. And my family went on vacation for 2 weeks. When we returned home we walked into our house but no one turned on the lights in my family room for like 20 minutes. I turned them on and my friend was just staring at our television, which was off, not saying a word. Didn't respond to my first few attempts to get his attention until he randomly snapped back into it. Creepy shit walking into your house after a vacation and turn on a light and see a kid who's zoned out. He has some mental problems and was heavily medicated as a kid. Came over to hang out often and knew we kept our side door unlocked. Needless to say we established some more rigid boundaries after. I was 4 years old and my first cousin tried to get me to give him a BJ. Several times. I didn't like the idea because that's where P comes from, so I told my parents. He was around 9 at the time. Her mother. My aunt dismissed it by, well, he must have learned it in school. Don't pay attention to it. A different incident came between our families and I haven't talked to them in over a decade. Can't say I'm devastated. When my niece was 3 we babysat her and her friend. Dog was barking. Friend stared at him and he stopped and slunk away. Wouldn't go in the same room as her the whole time. Never babysat that kid again. Making eye contact with a dog shows it that you're attempting to dominate it. It's one of the reasons dogs look away from you if you're yelling at them. They're emphasizing their subservience. When I first heard of it as a kid I tried it out on a random dog and it had a similar reaction to your story's dog. It barked at me for a bit and then kinda whined and left. I was 8 and felt really guilty afterwards, so never did it again. Not to do with me. But my dad told me when he was a kid his neighbors, also kids, broke into his house when they were out and sacked the place. Including cutting their pet goldfish in half. My dad's parents found out and the neighbors' parents made the kids clean up the house. Mum was telling me of a story from when I was 6 when my friend killed a lizard in front of everyone and laughed. When I was about 12 years old I was at a friend's house building things with Lego. My friend goes to the bathroom and about 5-10 minutes later I hear him yell down, "Mom, I need a wipe." Since I was a curious kid I followed his mother when she then proceeded to open the bathroom and wipe her 13-year-old son's ass for him. I thought it was weird even then. Grades 1-3. I was friends with a girl who had issues, adopted from an abusive home before we met. She would randomly decide to just leave our playdates to walk herself home. Which was not possible because she lived a good 20-minute drive away. Some of that highway. My mom describes her as nice. But kinda veery sometimes. When I was a kid I had one of those asshole friends who was more of a friend of my video games. You know the deal. Coming over constantly to play, single player, games. Demanding me to give him food and all that jazz. One day he came over when I was away somewhere. No one answered the door but he noticed that the window to my room was open, so the ducker climbed in. Turned on my PC and tried to play something but he heard my mom coming out of the shower so he bolted. Told me the next day at school and I told everyone including my parents. Then school and his parents got involved and Jay got in a ton of shit for that. Hated me ever since. Not my story. But a friend's. One time when she was in 2nd grade. My friend had another friend over at her house. At one point. They were just sitting on a couch. When all of a sudden. The other kid started choking my friend on the floor. She barely had enough time to call her mom. The friend wasn't allowed at her house anymore. Thought it was creepy at first, but this kid who was the first friend I made in my new school always came over to my house. After school he was there. Weekends he was there the first thing in the morning. Holidays and summer he basically lived with us. He never wanted me to go to his house. Found out his mom was an alcoholic and beat him. His dad died in a car accident back when he was 10 years old, so I told my mom this and she never turned him away even times when I wasn't there. He eventually lived with us from 8th grade until junior year in HS when his uncle got out the military and took him in. Not a parent. but a teenage male cousin's friend drilled a hole into the bathroom wall from his bedroom for presumably peeping. Said little cousin lived with his grandmother. Sigh. A friend of my older sister spent the afternoon at our place and tried to drown me in the bathtub when I was a baby. My mum walked in and stopped him. She wasn't very pleased. The 5-yo twins from next door walked into my house without knocking or being invited and sat down in our living room and started playing with my kids' toys. I asked if they were okay, and one of them replied, yeah. Our parents need some alone time, so we need to be here for a while. About 15 minutes later, they both stood up at the same time and walked out the door without saying anything. Not a parent, but my dad told me a story about me. He was taking me to the park. I was playing with geese, and he got distracted talking to moms in the park. Then he heard a very loud goose scream. Turned around and saw that I was choking the poor thing. I was 3 at the time. He had to grab me and leave the park to avoid freaked out and judging moms. I had a work friend bring her kid over to play with mine. He was 8. I have a boy who was 7 and a girl who was almost 5 at the time. He told her she was going to have a baby and had her lay down and take off her pants and panties. My son knew this was wrong and came to tell me before anything else happened. My friend was super embarrassed and we actually didn't talk much for a few months because we were both uncomfortable with it. We tried to get together in a public place a couple of times since then, but it just wasn't the same anymore. I had already quit working with her before the incident, but I'm still kind of sad at losing my friend. Parent of 2 girls. In preschool she had a few boyfriends who were about the same age as her who would come over quite often. One day I walked in on what I thought was this kid reading to her, but he had his big dig out. I promptly yelled at him, asking what he thought he was doing, and he simply replied with, "I'm teaching her to read backwards." With ya big dig out. Neighbor's daughter found a bird. Tried to raise it and release it later. She played with it. Stuff like cars and apparently submarine. Because we found it between the couch cushions. At our home. Not theirs. My daughter was about 8 when she had a friend sleep over. They were asleep. Supposedly. When we looked up and the girl was just standing there staring at us. We were in our room with the door open so we could hear. Creepy. Obligatory not a parent, but there was this kid that I was friends with for basically all of elementary school, and his mom let him do anything. He watched R-rated movies when he couldn't have been older than 7. Never brushed his teeth. Had his own computer. etc. So you can see how he was more knowledgeable than me in the 6th department. Well. Anyways, one day me and him were at my mom's house alone and he dropped his pants and tried to make me suck him off. Since I guess he thought I would just go along with it. Well. I didn't understand the sexual implications of that at the time, but I knew it was gross, so I pulled his pants up and told him how gross it was and went back to playing Pokemon. I was the weird kid. I used to sneak to the kitchen to eat plain salt. I found out about masturbating at quite a very young age. I was constantly plucking my eyelashes. I did more weird stuff that I'm not quite comfortable sharing. This is probably tame compared to some of these other stories. But IDK.